Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
And this week, fiery testimony on Capitol Hill from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary, facing calls to resign from Democrats and public health workers across the nation and here in Metro Atlanta. I'm Rick Fulbaum. This is On the Record. And more than 1,000 current and former employees of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services now urging Kennedy to resign, writing in a letter that his leadership has, quote, put the health of all Americans at risk. The letter, which was also addressed to members of Congress, comes after a dizzying few weeks at the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Within the past month, a gunman who police say expressed discontent with the COVID vaccine fired hundreds of rounds at the agency's DeKalb County campus, killing police officer David Rose. And just last week, the Trump administration fired the agency's director after only a few weeks on the job. And that sparked the resignation of several other high-ranking experts at the CDC. All of it coming to a head this week on Capitol Hill.
You're evading the question.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the hot seat, grilled by senators from both sides of the aisle.
I'm asking the questions for Mr. Kennedy on behalf of parents and schools and teachers all over the United States of America who deserve so much better than your leadership.
For more than 3 hours, Kennedy defended his stance on vaccines, his leadership at HHS, and what he believes is the truth about COVID-19.
We were lied to about everything. We were lied to about natural immunity. We were lied to about, we were told again and again the vaccines would prevent transmission, they'd prevent infection. It wasn't true.
Since taking office, Kennedy has looked to cut 10,000 jobs across the USDA, FDA, CDC, and NIH. Back in July, he replaced the entire Federal Vaccine Advisory Committee with Make America Healthy Again loyalists. Georgia Democrat Senator Raphael Warnock accused Kennedy of trying to use his office to push forward his personal agenda.
It's clear that you are carrying out your extremist beliefs, which is why you attempted to fire Dr.
Senator, we're the sickest people in the world. We're the sickest people on earth.
You are a hazard to the health of the American people. I think that you ought to resign.
Two Republican physicians in the Senate expressing concern about the Trump administration's changes to vaccine policy.
The public has seen measles outbreaks, leadership in the National Institute of Health questioning the use of mRNA vaccines. Americans don't know who to rely on.
Kennedy defended his controversial moves to reshape government public health agencies.
If we don't end this chronic disease, we are the sickest country in the world. That's why we have to fire people at the CDC. They did not do their job.
Joining us now, Atlanta News First political reporter Doug Reardon, along with our panel. Fal Sabak is a former executive director of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus and assistant vice president at McGuire Woods Consulting. And Seth Weathers is a former Georgia state director of the Trump presidential campaign and the founder of Conservative Dads. And thank you all for being here and for going on the record. Appreciate it. And Doug, let me start with you because you've spent some time out at the CDC talking to some of these former and current employees who have written this letter that we've been talking about. What do they tell you?
Well, they're certainly concerned enough to call for the resignation. There were over 1,000 signatures on that petition last time we checked. And, obviously they're concerned for their physical safety. A lot of them are really upset that they have to return to work on the 15th. We know that that's the mandated date for them to get back, but they're still shaken up by this. And when you talk to them, I think even more than the physical health of themselves that they're worried about, they're just concerned about the message that American people are getting. That's what we keep hearing. And they don't want the American people to be misled. They don't want the American people to be confused.
Now, Seth, vaccines have long been a cornerstone in our public health here in this country, and they have saved millions of lives over the years. That's not opinion, that's fact. And we heard it not just from Democrats, but from Republicans on the panel as well. The doctors on the panel yesterday, or this week rather, at the Senate hearings. What do you think about this message here, and are you concerned that Secretary Kennedy is putting Americans' health at risk?
I find it a little fun that now Health and Human Services is concerned about Americans' health, considering we have a health crisis in this country that's gone unchecked for decades. And a lot of that is information that people received from the government. You look at the the food chart that we've had since, 79, that is completely opposite of what reality is. I think this is political. I think the people signing these letters are signing it because they're unhappy politically with RFK Jr. I think what RFK Jr. is saying, and I think he said it in the hearing, was something more or less of, I'm not going to make a recommendation that isn't necessarily right for people.
So, Fal, you heard what Seth was saying, and a lot of Americans agree with that sentiment. What do you think?
So I think the problem isn't just the COVID-19 vaccine, which has been proven to defend people, protect kids, everybody. I think what you're seeing now, what's going to come next, is the scheduling for the children's vaccine. I mean, you've seen states like Florida who said that you're no longer going to have to vaccinate your kids when they go to school. You're seeing, and we're actually in the midst of a measles outbreak, for the worst in 33 years. And so that kind of rhetoric of anti-vaccinations coming directly from the Director of Health and Human Services, that is something concerning.
Why is it concerning with the measles? Like, do we have millions of kids dying from measles right now? I mean,
well, how many kids have to die from measles?
I understand people die from everything, so people die from penicillin, but nonetheless, like forcing measles vaccination, like what would be even the purpose of forcing? Like, if you want to have your child vaccinated, do it. And look, I'm not someone that is anti all vaccines by any means. The problem is people have lost complete trust in the government, obviously, and the government health agencies. And so when they've lost complete trust in the whole thing, we were lied to about COVID from almost start to finish.
When you talk to CDC employees, you know, vaccines really seems to be the line in the sand. There are some CDC employees that have told me that they like the way that Secretary Kennedy wants to handle things in foods, right? Red dyes and sugar content. They like that he's taking a look at the content of people's water and things of that nature. And so I will say vaccines does seem to be this line in the sand, not just for the people on the committee this week questioning him, but also for the people that are working for him at the CDC and at HHS.
Val, let me give you the last word on this.
Yeah, look, I think that the science behind vaccines are tested and true. They've been tested and true throughout the states. You know, it is a concern of public health. If one child is not vaccinated versus other kids, who's going to catch that disease at that point? I mean, that's like you're endangering more than just 1 or 2 kids.
Straight ahead on the record, Metro Atlanta marking 1 year since the deadly shooting at Apalachee High School. Atlanta News First goes on the record with a Georgia state lawmaker now working to stop history from repeating itself.
On the record right now, Metro Atlanta pausing to honor a tragic anniversary. It's been 1 year since 4 people were killed in a shooting at Apalachee High School. Police say on September 4th of last year, a 14-year-old student took his father's gun to school and allegedly opened fire inside Barrow County's campus, killing 2 of his classmates, Christian Angulo and Mason Scammerhorn, and 2 educators, Christina Irami and Richard Aspinwall. That tragic memory still fresh in the minds of current and former Apalachee students.
I remember the stinking feeling of our reality. I started crying in desperation to find my mother while being held up by 2 other students.
I have never been put into such a tragic, traumatizing, evil situation.
Because while we cannot change the past, we can shape the future. And I believe that future can be safer, kinder, and brighter.
And the violence did spark a change in Georgia. Months later, lawmakers passed legislation mandating panic buttons in schools connected directly to emergency services. It also created a database that allows schools to share information on students when they transfer. But State Representative Michelle Au says there is more work to be done. I sat down with her on the record. Dr. Au, thank you for joining us on the record. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
The anniversary of the Apalachee shooting was this past week. And you've gotten very close with some of the students, some of the teachers, some of the parents that have been in that district and really gone through this. What has the last year been like for them?
I think that sometimes when things like the Apalachee shooting happen, for those of us who don't live there, it's something that gets a lot of attention in the immediate period, but then in the nature of any news story, that attention tends to fade, right? And we start to forget the sense of urgency we felt around the problems presented in that news story. Of course, none of that is faded for the families or the students at that school, right? And part of why it was so important to have them here was to hear from them what they thought has changed since the shooting and what change they think still needs to be
There were things that students said that they were encouraged by, right? That there was a weapons detection system, that they had school resource officers, that they had panic buttons on hand. Some of the things that were mandated by the General Assembly just a couple months after the shooting happened. But again, none of it worked. There were still 4 people that lost their life that day. So what still needs to happen?
So immediately after the shooting, I think there was a lot of attention and interest in improving school safety. And I want to give a lot of credit to Speaker Burns in particular, who really helped push through this school safety package that had many elements that I think many people in the community were asking for.
Yeah, you're talking about House Bill 268.
Correct, correct. I have no objection to the bill, generally speaking, only that when you advance a bill in response to a school shooting, in fact, the deadliest school shooting in the history of Georgia, it is a conspicuous omission to not have anything in there regarding gun safety.
And you have continued over the years to push a number of gun safety storage bills, things like the tax credits for purchases of gun safes and gun locks, mandating those things in the state of Georgia, red flag laws that would take guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. You know, none of them have passed. And you guys will try again this year, but what do you think will be different about this year?
Children and teenagers are a special class of people that we take a little bit of extra effort to protect, right? And we can understand why unsupervised minors should not have free access to lethal weapons, right? I don't think it's easy to argue against that, right? Sometimes it's the approach or the politicization of an issue that makes it more difficult to do the basic, obvious, right things. But I would think that if people in either party are interested in listening to what the majority of Georgians want, that they have to start hearing that gun safety is, you know, certainly a priority for them.
You can still get a gun out of a lockbox. You can still cut a gun lock. You can still get your hands on a firearm in a lot of cases if you really wanted to. Would safe storage be kind of the magic pill to some of the issues that we've seen at Apalachee, at the CDC, and elsewhere around the country?
Criminals will always break the law is not a sound argument to why we should not do basic common sense public safety laws. And what we've seen in the research and what we've seen in other states that do have safe storage laws is that it does demonstrably cut down not just on minors accessing guns, right, but also that it diffuses crimes of impulse or passion where people can easily and rapidly access a lethal weapon and use it in a time of mental health crisis.
You know, you are a practitioner of medicine. You're an anesthesiologist. You care very deeply about the good ethical practice of medicine. What have you made of what's going on at the CDC in the last few months?
I really am so heartbroken about what changes are taking place at the CDC and the attacks on our public health system at large. You know, in addition to being a practicing physician, I actually do also have an advanced degree in public health. In some ways, public health is a victim of its own successes in that it works so well that we get the luxury of not thinking about all the ways that we're protected. But while it's very easy to break things, it's very difficult to build them in the first place, and it's going to be even more difficult to build them back up again. What I tend to see more now, openly, is explicit villainization of people who push public health policies, specific villainization of people who administer vaccines, public health officials, physicians, medical professionals. I think that when we saw what happened at the CDC with the shooting on Clifton Road, it was obviously shocking. It's shocking to hear that 500 rounds were fired into a federal building. But a lot of us who work in the public health space were not altogether surprised, because this is the type of thing that we all have been worried about as the culmination of rhetoric that is spreading unchecked.
All right, Dr. Michelle Howe, I appreciate you joining us on the record. Thank you for your time.
And we're back with the panel. And Fal, let me start with you. What can Democrats point to show voters that they are doing something to address this epidemic of mass shootings in our country?
Yeah, well, look, the state Democrats can actually point to a lot of things. They have filed pieces of legislation calling for Brady law regulations, red flag laws. They've helped pass the mental health bills. They've helped pass the school safety bills. So there's a lot, and they're always constantly filing legislation. They've been filing legislation for years, trying to curb this terrible tragedy that's been happening in our schools.
And Seth, you know, Republicans like to talk about mental health, and obviously that is a major component when it comes to these mass shootings. But when we look at the bill, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, there was a lot of funding that was cut, a lot of which would have gone to mental health access for people around the country. So what is the way that Republicans are going to seriously address this issue and let voters know that they want to do something about this?
Yeah, I guess you got to look at are the mental health programs that were cut, were those preventing school shootings? I don't think we have a lot to point to in that area. And what I would like to see in something, every time I see one of these on television, it blows my mind that we can't get our elected officials to care as much about schools as we do banks. They're literally wide open targets. Like, it just blows my mind. Like, I don't leave my door unlocked. I'm not saying school doors are unlocked when the children are there, but we're literally filling the school with a bunch of defenseless people. And what's our law enforcement doing? The law enforcement is not the problem itself in that, but they need to be placed there. Law enforcement, whatever you want to do, private, but we've got to have security.
So as you listen to Republicans who are in office, Republicans who are running for office, do you hear any of them addressing the issues that you're talking about?
Every year, I feel like we do hear some of this about putting law enforcement in schools. We've never seen it actually get passed. They're actually having one in every school. Like, they kind of do this thing where they roam around, but like, it's just a numbers game at that point. That would be my question to people running now is, why don't we have that in place? And will you support legislation to do so? I feel like that could be, is that bipartisan?
Absolutely.
Sounds like something.
These are our kids.
Well, and Apalachee did have school resource officers, several of them around that campus, and they've been credited with stopping the shooting in under a minute. And so, obviously damage was done, but that is something that both Democrats and Republicans have praised at the state capitol.
Still ahead on the record, push for paper ballots at polls across Georgia. Republicans now trying to change the way you vote. A federal judge has dismissed an attempt by Georgia's sitting Attorney General Chris Carr to prevent Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones from raising unlimited funds for his gubernatorial campaign. Jones and Carr are both trying to secure the Republican nomination for governor. The ruling was in response to Carr's attempt to cut off Jones's ability to access cash from a leadership committee that allows Georgia's legislative leaders to raise unlimited funds. Carr argued the leadership committee set up a campaign finance structure that unfairly favors Jones. But the judge ruled that other leadership committees are just as capable of harming Carr's campaign as Jones, and he dismissed the suit. Carr can refile his complaint, and he may. Political science professor and Atlanta News First political analyst Dr. Ben Taylor joins us now to try to unpack this ruling. Good to see you. Thanks very much for being here. And this is the fourth case in 4 years challenging an aspect of this leadership committee statute. Can you walk us through the ruling? What does it mean, essentially?
Okay, great. And I'm happy to be here as well. In 2021, the state of Georgia changed the law to allow the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House, and the majority and minority leaders in the legislature to have what are called leadership committees that effectively can raise unlimited amounts of funds anytime, which is different than Georgia's traditional campaign finance law, which both limits the amount of money you can raise as well as when you can raise it. Generally, you can't raise money during the legislative session, but these leadership committees can. And most importantly, there are no limits on the amount of funds they can raise, which is what the real dispute in the situation in the Republican gubernatorial primary process is right now.
And Carr, as Attorney General, does not fall under that rule. He is not eligible for that unlimited fundraising.
That's exactly right. But this is the first time that we've seen it sort of come out like this in a primary process to be a big deal.
The other big story that we're keeping an eye on is Georgia Republicans are now trying to change the way that people vote, like physically in the ballot box. A pair of GOP lawmakers are asking state election leaders to roll out paper ballots for you to hand mark. Very different than when you go in and you use that touchscreen election monitor system. And this could be put into place as early as November's Public Service Commission election. Instead of utilizing the voting machines that you're used to, they'll do those hand-marked paper ballots. So, Ben, why are Republicans trying to do this?
I think, essentially, if anyone's voted absentee and you get your absentee ballot from your county office in the mail, that's the kind of ballot they're talking about. Those are hand-marked paper ballots that are then read with an optical scan reader and then tabulated. And about 40 states still use hand-marked ballots with optical scan readers, so it's not uncommon. But I think that within the Republican Party over the last few years, there seems to be sort of a move towards wanting paper ballots. Again, some people think that it's more secure, although I should point out that both Secretary of State Raffensperger as well as numerous third-party folks who have looked at Georgia's election say that we have extremely secure elections, that we had recounts in 2020 and they were accurate. But again, I want to point out that about 40 states do use this kind of voting method, so it's actually the most common type in the country.
Well, all week long, Atlanta News First digs into the latest developments from our elected leaders here in the state capitol and in Washington. Subscribe to the On the Record podcast to get political updates sent right to the palm of your hand. And that is our show for this week. Thanks to Dr. Ben Taylor, Fal Sabak, Seth Weathers for going on the record with us. And thank you for watching. We'll see you next Sunday.